Winter, 1895. An overnight train races through the Scottish darkness toward London. 12 first-class passengers, one locked compartment, one dead man with a knife wound to the heart. No weapon found, no way in, no way out. By morning, a schoolteacher named Margaret Blackwood will uncover a truth stranger than murder itself. A dead man who killed himself with someone else's help. This is the night that changes everything.
Before we start, rate this story from 1 to 10 in the comments. Tell me where you're watching from, and subscribe to support the channel. Your support means everything. Now, let's begin. February 14th, 1895, 9:30 in the evening. Margaret Blackwood stood on platform 9 at Edinburgh Waverley Station, clutching her worn leather valise. At 34, she had the composed bearing of someone who spent her days teaching unruly schoolboys Latin grammar, patient, observant, unflappable. Her dark wool traveling cloak was practical rather than fashionable, her gloves showed careful mending, but her eyes missed nothing. The midnight express to London loomed before her, breathing steam into the frozen night air. This was a journey Margaret made twice yearly to visit her sister Eleanor in Bloomsbury, and she always chose the overnight train for its efficiency. Tonight, she'd splurged on a first-class sleeping compartment, a rare luxury on a teacher's salary. The platform bustled with last-minute activity. Margaret observed her fellow travelers with the same instinct that made her an excellent teacher, reading posture, noting anxiety, cataloging details. An elderly gentleman ahead of her struggled up the train steps, leaning heavily on a silver-topped cane. He was well-dressed, expensive overcoat, quality shoes, but clearly unwell. Each breath rattled in his chest, and he paused twice to cough into a handkerchief. Near the station entrance, two middle-aged men in business suits argued in urgent whispers. "Vincent, the creditors won't wait another week," one hissed. The other, Vincent presumably, shot back. "Then you shouldn't have gambled away our operating capital." A woman in burgundy silk supervised porters loading excessive luggage. She wore jewelry that would feed a working-class family for a year. Ruby brooch, diamond rings, garnet earrings that caught the gaslight. Her face had the carefully maintained beauty of someone fighting time with expensive cosmetics and sheer determination. A younger man paced near the platform's edge, checking his pocket watch every few seconds. Even from a distance, Margaret could see the tension in his shoulders, the nervous energy that made standing still impossible. At the far end, a tall man with military bearing stood perfectly motionless, observing everything. A scar ran from his left temple down to his jaw, an old wound, long healed. His eyes never stopped scanning, as if cataloging threats only he could see. Margaret filed these observations away and boarded the train. The first-class corridor was narrow and elegant, polished mahogany panels, brass fixtures gleaming in the gaslight, burgundy carpet muffling footsteps. 12 compartments, 6 on each side, numbered 1 through 12. Margaret found compartment 7 halfway down on the right. She unlocked it and stepped inside. The space was tiny but efficiently designed. 2 velvet bench seats faced each other, both converting to beds for overnight travel. A small window overlooked the platform. Above each seat, a brass luggage rack. In the corner, a fold-down washstand with porcelain basin and pitcher. A small mirror reflected the warm gaslight. She unpacked essentials, nightgown, toiletry case, a book, Middlemarch by George Eliot, which she'd been meaning to reread. Also her teaching notebook and pencil, useful for organizing thoughts during travel.
As she settled in, voices filtered through the thin walls. To her left, compartment 6, heavy footsteps, then silence. To her right, compartment 8, a young couple giggled. "Our first journey as husband and wife," the woman exclaimed. The man's response was affectionate but muffled. Across the corridor, compartment 4, the woman in burgundy silk berated a porter. "Careful with that hat box, it's an original Parisian design." Further down, someone coughed, that same wet, painful sound from the elderly gentleman. The train lurched, a whistle shrieked, platform 9 began sliding away, and they were moving. Margaret tried reading, but found concentration difficult. The train picked up speed, racing into the Scottish night. Through her window, Edinburgh's lights disappeared into darkness and falling snow. Around 10 o'clock, there was a knock. Margaret opened her door to find the woman in burgundy silk standing in the corridor. "Forgive the intrusion," the woman said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "I'm Mrs. Constance Hartley, compartment 4. I wanted to introduce myself. One feels safer knowing there's another respectable lady aboard. Trains these days attract such questionable characters." "Margaret Blackwood," Margaret replied politely. "I teach at Ashford Academy, travelling to visit family." "A teacher? How industrious." Mrs. Hartley's tone suggested teaching was barely above domestic service. "I'm travelling to my niece's wedding. She's marrying Lord Pemberton's second son. The ceremony will be at St. George's, Hanover Square, quite exclusive." After Mrs. Hartley returned to her compartment, Margaret tried reading again, but the atmosphere felt wrong, tense, expectant, like the moment before a thunderstorm. She listened to the sounds around her. In compartment 3, the business partners, low, urgent conversation. "If Whitmore reveals what we've done, we're finished." The other voice. "Then we must ensure he stays silent." Whitmore, the same surname as someone on this train. In compartment 5, directly across from her, footsteps paced back and forth, back and forth. Whoever was in there couldn't sit still. Around 10:15, the conductor made his rounds. He was a slight man in his 50s, with wire-rimmed spectacles and the tired efficiency of someone who'd worked this route for years. "Everything satisfactory, miss?" he asked Margaret. "Yes, thank you. Might I ask about the other passengers? I'm curious who's travelling tonight." The conductor consulted his passenger manifest. "Certainly. Compartment 1 is Dr. Edmund Thorne, a retired physician travelling to see his daughter. Compartment 2 was reserved but never claimed. Happens sometimes. Compartment 3 has Mr. Vincent Ashford and Mr. Peter Kingsley, business partners in textiles." He continued, "Compartment 4 is Mrs. Hartley, whom you've met. Compartment 5 is Mr. James Whitmore, a banker from Edinburgh. Seems rather anxious about something. Compartment 6 is Mr. Thomas Brennan, recently discharged from the army. Your compartment is 7. Compartment 8 has Mr. and Mrs. Gerald Ashton, newlyweds on their honeymoon. Then we have Lord Cecil Harrington in 9, rather demanding gentleman. Compartment 10 has Miss Sarah Fletcher, a governess. Compartment 11 is Mr. David Moss, journalist for the Edinburgh Chronicle, and compartment 12 is Mrs. Dorothy Price, elderly widow visiting her grandson in London." Margaret thanked him and made notes in her book. Compartment 1, Dr. Edmund Thorne, elderly physician, unwell. Compartment 2, reserved, unclaimed. Compartment 3, Vincent Ashford and Peter Kingsley, business partners arguing about Whitmore revealing something. A banker named Whitmore was in compartment 5. coincidence or blackmail. At 11 o'clock, Margaret changed into her nightgown and prepared for sleep. She converted the bench seats into a narrow bed, turned down the gaslight, and lay in darkness, listening to the train's rhythm. The newlyweds in compartment 8 had gone quiet. The pacing in compartment 5 stopped around 11:15. Dr. Thorne coughed once more, then silence. She was drifting towards sleep when she heard it. Footsteps in the corridor. Soft, careful, trying to be quiet. They passed her door, continued toward the front of the carriage, then stopped. A door opened, closed. Silence. Margaret checked her watch. 11:47. She almost investigated, then decided against it. Probably someone using the lavatory or the conductor making rounds. She closed her eyes and slept. Margaret woke to screaming. Her pocket watch read 12:43. "Help! Someone help! He's dead! Oh God, he's dead in there!" The voice was female, raw with shock and terror, Mrs. Hartley. Margaret threw her travelling cloak over her nightgown and rushed to her door. The corridor filled with passengers emerging from their compartments in various states of undress. Mrs. Hartley stood outside compartment 5, both hands pressed to her mouth, face white as chalk. "What's happened?" Margaret asked. Mrs. Hartley pointed at compartment 5 with a trembling hand. "In there! Blood! He's dead!" Margaret looked through the small window in the door. A man sat in the window seat, head tilted back. His eyes were open, staring at nothing. Blood had soaked the front of his shirt, a dark stain scented over his heart. His right hand clutched a crumpled piece of paper. His left hand lay open on his lap. The young, nervous man from the platform, James Whitmore, the banker. "Stand back!" The conductor pushed through the crowd, keys jangling. "Everyone stand back!" He tried the door handle. It turned, but the door didn't open. "It's locked from the inside," he said, voice shaking. "Then use your master key," Lord Harrington demanded, appearing in an expensive silk dressing gown. The conductor fumbled with his keys, found the master, inserted it, the lock clicked. The door swung open. The smell hit them, copper blood, and something chemical, sharp and wrong. Margaret forced herself to observe, cataloguing details. The victim sat in the window seat. Blood on his shirt had stopped spreading. He'd been dead for a while. No sign of struggle. The compartment was neat, orderly. The window beside him was shut and latched from inside. One shoe was half unlaced, trailing laces. The other was perfectly tied. His jacket hung neatly on the door hook. A glass of amber liquid, whiskey, sat half empty on the fold-down table. "Don't touch anything," Margaret heard herself say with authority. "The police will need to see everything exactly as it is." The conductor nodded gratefully. "We're 40 minutes from Carlisle. I'll wire ahead for police." 40 minutes? Mrs. Hartley's voice rose to a shriek. "There's a murderer on this train." "Everyone return to your compartments," the conductor ordered. "Lock your doors, open them for no one except me or the police." Slowly, reluctantly, passengers retreated. Margaret was last, still staring at the scene. The blood pattern, centered, suggesting a single thrust to the heart. The crumpled paper in his right hand, what did it say? The half-unlaced shoe, had he been interrupted while undressing? The glass of whiskey, he'd been relaxing, not expecting danger. The locked door, the locked window, how did the killer escape? Margaret returned to compartment 7, but didn't sleep. She sat in darkness, listening to the train race through the night toward Carlisle, and answers. Carlisle Station, 3:47 a.m. The train sat motionless while police swarmed aboard. Detective Inspector Aldous Reeves took command, a barrel-chested man in his 50s with impressive mutton chop whiskers. He moved with efficient authority, issuing orders, examining the scene, questioning the conductor. Photographers documented compartment 5. A police surgeon examined the body. Junior constables measured, collected evidence, took notes. At 4:30 a.m., Inspector Reeves gathered all first-class passengers in the dining car of the adjacent carriage. Margaret studied her fellow passengers properly for the first time. Dr. Edmund Thorne, compartment 1, perhaps 75, sparse white hair, trembling hands. Despite the hour, he wore a proper dark suit and starched collar. His breathing was labored, and he coughed frequently into a handkerchief. Compartment 2, still unclaimed, conspicuously empty. Vincent Ashford and Peter Kingsley, compartment 3, both in their 40s, both looking terrified. Ashford was taller, with slicked-back hair and nervous hands that kept cracking knuckles. Kingsley was shorter, rounder, his face gray with fear. Mrs. Constance Hartley, compartment 4, somehow fully dressed in silk gown and jewelry despite the hour. She sat rigid, projecting respectability, but her hands shook when she lifted her teacup. James Whitmore, compartment 5, dead. His empty chair felt like an accusation. Thomas Brennan, compartment 6, the military man, sat at attention, his scarred face impassive. His dark suit was worn but respectable, his eyes constantly assessed, catalogued, anticipated. Margaret Blackwood, compartment 7, herself. Gerald and Lily Ashton, compartment 8, clinging to each other. Gerald was perhaps 26, fair-haired, handsome in a soft way, looking bewildered. Lily was younger, maybe 22, with dark hair, wide eyes, and obvious terror marring her beauty. Lord Cecil Harrington, compartment 9, perhaps 60, well-fed, radiating outrage. This is absolutely unacceptable. I have an appointment with the Foreign Secretary today. This delay is intolerable. Sarah Fletcher, compartment 10, perhaps 30, dressed in somber gray governess clothes. She had the quiet, invisible quality of someone who'd learned to go unnoticed, but her eyes were sharp, intelligent, watching everything. David Moss, compartment 11, young, maybe 28, ink-stained fingers, a journalist's eager energy. He kept taking notes, trying to be subtle, failing completely. Dorothy Price, compartment 12, a sweet-faced, elderly woman in her 70s, white hair, grandmother's gentle manner. She kept apologizing for being trouble and offering to make tea. Inspector Reeves addressed them all. James Whitmore died between midnight and 12:30 this morning. He was stabbed once through the heart. The weapon hasn't been recovered. His compartment door was locked from inside. The window was locked from inside. No one saw or heard anything unusual until Mrs. Hartley discovered the body at 12:43. He paused, letting the impossibility sink in. The victim was alone in a locked room, no weapon present, no sign of struggle, yet the wound angle makes suicide impossible. He couldn't have stabbed himself that way, which means someone on this train killed James Whitmore and somehow escaped from a locked compartment. Mrs. Hartley whimpered. Lily Ashton buried her face in her husband's shoulder. Until I determine who and how, no one leaves this train. We'll conduct individual interviews and search all compartments. I expect full cooperation. Are we suspects? Gerald Ashton asked, voice cracking. Everyone is a suspect, Inspector Reeves said flatly. Inspector Reeves conducted interviews in compartment 5 itself, the murder scene. Margaret found this psychologically clever. Sitting where the victim died would rattle even composed liars. Mrs. Hartley went first.
emerging 20 minutes later with red eyes. Others followed: Dr. Thorne, the business partners together, Mr. Brennan. When Margaret's turn came, she found Reeves sitting in the blood-stained seat. A young constable stood by the door, taking notes. Miss Blackwood, teacher at Ashford Academy, traveling to visit your sister in London, correct? Yes, Inspector. Did you know the victim? No, I'd never seen him before boarding. Did you hear anything unusual last night? Margaret considered carefully. I heard pacing in compartment 5 from about 10:30 to 11:15, then it stopped. At 11:47, I heard footsteps in the corridor. Soft, careful. Chapter 5. Margaret's Interview. Inspector Reeves conducted interviews in compartment 5 itself, the murder scene. Margaret found this psychologically clever. Sitting where the victim died would rattle even composed liars. Mrs. Hartley went first, emerging 20 minutes later with red eyes. Others followed: Dr. Thorne, the business partners together, Mr. Brennan. When Margaret's turn came, she found Reeves sitting in the blood-stained seat. A young constable stood by the door, taking notes. Miss Blackwood, teacher at Ashford Academy, traveling to visit your sister in London, correct? Yes, Inspector. Did you know the victim? No, I'd never seen him before boarding. Did you hear anything unusual last night? Margaret considered carefully. I heard pacing in compartment 5 from about 10:30 to 11:15, then it stopped. At 11:47, I heard footsteps in the corridor. Soft, careful, as if someone was trying to be quiet. They passed my door, continued toward the front of the carriage, and stopped. A door opened and closed. The footsteps didn't return. Reeves leaned forward, interested. You're certain of the time? I checked my pocket watch specifically because it seemed odd, someone moving about so late, so quietly. Did you investigate? No, I assumed it was someone using the lavatory or the conductor. The conductor finished his rounds at 11, and these footsteps, male or female? Margaret closed her eyes, reconstructing the memory. Light, not heavy boots, someone moving carefully on the balls of their feet, could have been either gender. What else did you observe? The business partners in compartment 3 were arguing about money and someone named Whitmore. I heard one say, if Whitmore reveals what we've done, we're ruined. The other replied, then we ensure he stays silent. Inspector made notes. Anything else? Margaret described her other observations: Dr. Thorne's worsening cough, Mrs. Hartley's anxiety, the newlyweds' happiness, and Mr. Brennan's watchfulness. Then she said, Inspector, there's something odd about the scene. Go on. The victim's shoes, one half unlaced, one perfectly tied. His jacket hung neatly, but his collar was open. A glass of whiskey on the table, half drunk. It suggests he was preparing for bed, but hadn't finished. Yet there's no sign of struggle. If someone interrupted him, he would have reacted. Your point? Either he knew his killer and felt no threat, or something else happened, something that doesn't fit murder as we understand it.
Reeves studied her with new interest. You have an alternative theory? Not yet, just observations that don't align. For instance, the crumpled paper in his hand. What did it say? Reeves pulled an evidence envelope from his pocket and removed a telegram, blood-stained but readable. Trust no one. They know. Destroy everything. No signature. When was this received? Margaret asked. Yesterday afternoon in Edinburgh. Did Mr. Whitmore destroy everything as instructed? We're searching his luggage to determine that. Margaret handed back the telegram. May I ask what the other passengers said? Reeves decided to share. Mrs. Hartley claims she couldn't sleep, wanted to ask the conductor for warm milk. She walked past your compartment at 12:43, glanced into compartment 5, saw the body and screamed. She walked past my compartment at 12:43, so she claims. I was awake at that time. I heard her scream, but I heard no footsteps before it. Reeves made a note. Dr. Thorne took laudanum for his cough at 10:30 and heard nothing. Ashford and Kingsley were together in compartment 3 all night, each providing the other's alibi. Brennan took a sleeping draught. The Ashtons were occupied. Everyone else claims they slept through everything. Everyone has an alibi, Evan observed. Or everyone is lying. After her interview, Margaret was permitted to observe the evidence layout in the conductor's small office. Reeves had noticed her sharp observations and tacitly acknowledged her usefulness. The contents of James Whitmore's pockets and luggage were spread on a table, each item tagged. From his pockets, 1 wallet, £30 in notes, various calling cards, 1 gold pocket watch, stopped at 12:17 a.m., 1 silver cigarette case, monogrammed JW, 2 keys on a ring, 1 for his compartment, 1 unknown, the blood-stained telegram, a small red leather notebook. From his luggage, normal traveling clothes, toiletries and personal items, a second suit, approximately £200 in cash hidden in the trunk's lining, a locked metal document case, police working to open it. The pocket watch interested Margaret. It stopped at 12:17. That suggests the time of death or attack. Yet Mrs. Hartley didn't scream until 12:43, the constable noted. If he was attacked at 12:17 and died slowly, surely someone would have heard something. Unless he died quickly and silently, Margaret mused. She examined the red leather notebook. Through the evidence bag she could see it was a day planner, expensive leather, well used. "May I read this?" she asked. Reeves nodded permission. Margaret carefully opened the bag and lifted the notebook by its edges, avoiding bloodstains. She flipped through the pages. The first section was mundane, appointments, expense records, normal life. But halfway through, the tone changed. Cryptic entries. January 12th, VA, confirmed, 500 sufficient. January 15th, PK, same terms, matched payment. January 20th, CH, 200, wedding leverage, excellent. January 27th, TB, 150, military records more valuable than expected. Margaret's breath caught. She flipped to a back page where Whitmore had made a summary. Vincent Ashford, £500, embezzlement, textile accounts. Peter Kingsley, £500, as above, joint liability. C. Hartley, £200, past indiscretions, niece's wedding. Thomas Brennan, 150, court-martial, employment threat. 4 passengers from this very train, 4 blackmail victims. Inspector, Margaret said quietly, James Whitmore was a blackmailer. Reeves read the entries, his expression darkening. Good God! If 4 passengers were being blackmailed, any one might have wanted him dead. Or all 4 working together. Reeves called his constable. Bring me Ashford, Kingsley, Hartley and Brennan, separately. While they waited, Margaret continued examining evidence. The cigarette case caught her attention, heavier than it should be. May I? She asked Reeves. He handed it over. Margaret opened it. 6 cigarettes, neatly arranged. She removed them one by one, then pressed the case's interior. A false bottom clicked open. Inside was a second layer containing photographs. Margaret glimpsed one showing a well-dressed man in a compromising position. Reeves quickly closed the case. "Insurance," he said grimly. He kept proof of his victims' secrets. "Which means those 4 passengers had strong motives," Margaret agreed. "But we still have the locked room problem. How did any of them get in and out?" Reeves had no answer. Inspector Reeves brought the 4 blackmailed victims back to compartment 5, one at a time. Margaret observed from the corridor through the small window. Vincent Ashford came first, his composure shattered. He sat in the blood-stained seat and began talking immediately. "Yes, Whitmore was blackmailing us. Peter and me both. He discovered we'd embezzled from our textile company to cover gambling debts. He wanted £1,000 total, 500 from each." "Did you pay?" Reeves demanded. "We were going to. That's why we're on this train. The payment was supposed to happen in London today. Whitmore promised to return the evidence and we'd never hear from him again." "Did you believe him?" Ashford laughed bitterly. "Of course not. But what choice did we have? If he exposed us, we'd go to prison. Our families would be ruined." "Did you kill him?" "No. Why would we? Dead, he's useless to us. His evidence might surface anyway. We needed him alive to complete the transaction and get the evidence back." "Where were you between midnight and 12:30? "In compartment 3 with Peter. We were too anxious to sleep. We stayed up talking, worrying. Ask him. We were together the entire time." Peter Kingsley told the identical story, either rehearsed or truthful. Reeves couldn't determine which. Mrs. Constance Hartley came next. Her facade crumbled immediately. She sat heavily, jewelry jingling, and covered her face. 25 years ago, I wasn't Mrs. Hartley of Mayfair. I was Connie Hall of Whitechapel, a music hall singer. I sang bawdy songs and wore costumes that, well, I did what I had to do to survive." She looked up, eyes raw with old shame. "Then I met Mr. Hartley, wealthy merchant, 20 years my senior, lonely after his first wife died. I saw a way out and took it. I never told him about my past. He died believing he'd married a respectable woman." "And Whitmore found out?" "He tracked down old playbills from the music halls. My stage name was Connie Nightingale. My niece is marrying into aristocracy in 3 days. If those playbills surfaced, the scandal would destroy her prospects. Whitmore wanted £200 for his silence." "Did you pay him?" "I brought the money. It's still in my compartment, hidden in my hatbox. I never got the chance to hand it over." She started crying. "Now he's dead, and I don't know if his evidence will surface anyway. My niece's wedding is in 3 days." "Where were you at the time of the murder?" "In my compartment. I couldn't sleep, too anxious about the payment. I never left until I went looking for the conductor for warm milk. That's when I saw the body." "You walked past Miss Blackwood's compartment at 12:43. "Yes, she's right across from me in compartment 7. "Miss Blackwood was awake. She heard no footsteps." Mrs. Hartley blinked. I don't understand. I did walk past. Perhaps she was mistaken." "Perhaps. Or perhaps you're lying about when you discovered the body." Mrs. Hartley had no answer. Thomas Brennan was last. The former soldier sat at rigid attention, his scarred face impassive. 3 years ago in Sudan, my unit was ambushed.
Half my men died. I made a tactical decision to retreat rather than fight a losing battle. My superiors called it cowardice. I was court-martialed. Charges eventually dropped for lack of evidence, but the accusation remained on my record. Whitmore threatened to reveal this? He had copies of the court-martial proceedings, said he'd send them to every major employer in London. No one would hire me. He wanted £150. Did you bring the money? I scraped together £90, everything I have in the world. I plan to beg for more time to raise the rest. Where were you during the murder? In my compartment. I took laudanum around 10:30 for nightmares. I awoke to the screaming. Can anyone verify this? No, I was alone. You have military training. You'd know how to kill efficiently. Brennan met his eyes steadily. I do. But I didn't kill Whitmore, because if I had, Inspector, you'd never have found the body. I'd have made it look like an accident or disappearance. A single stab wound in a locked room, that's amateur work, or someone trying to make murder look impossible to deflect suspicion. It was a good point, and Reeves had no immediate counter. When all 4 suspects had been questioned, Reeves conferred with his constables, while Margaret listened from nearby. 4 suspects, 4 motives. Any could have done it. But how? Another asked. The locked door, locked window. How did they escape? Perhaps, Margaret said quietly, we're asking the wrong question. Everyone turned to look at her. We keep asking how the killer escaped from a locked room, but what if there was no escape? What if the killer was never in the room at all? Inspector Reeves invited Margaret into the conductor's office, tacit acknowledgement she'd moved from witness to consultant. Explain your theory, Miss Blackwood. Margaret organized her thoughts, falling back on teaching methods. Present the problem, work through logic, reach conclusion. The locked room paradox appears frequently in detective fiction. Poe, Collins, and others have explored it. There are generally 5 solutions. She ticked them off on her fingers. First, the door wasn't actually locked, only appeared to be. This doesn't work here, because the conductor verified it was locked from inside, and he needed his master key to open it. The lock shows no tampering. Second, a secret passage or hidden entrance. I've examined compartment 5. The walls are solid mahogany panels, the floor is continuous, the ceiling is intact. Unless there's remarkably sophisticated hidden engineering, which seems unlikely in a train carriage, there's no secret passage. Third, the victim was killed elsewhere and moved post-mortem. The blood patterns contradict this. He bled significantly onto the seat where he sat. That's where he died. He wasn't moved there afterward. Fourth, the victim was induced to kill himself by some elaborate mechanism or psychological manipulation. This is more interesting. What if someone convinced or tricked Whitmore into stabbing himself? Reeves frowned. How would that work? I'm not certain yet, but consider. Whitmore was a blackmailer with many enemies. What if someone threatened him? Stab yourself or we'll expose something even worse. Some form of psychological coercion. Far-fetched. I agree. Which brings us to the 5th possibility. The impossible is actually possible through overlooked means. And this is where things get interesting. She pulled out her notebook. Several inconsistencies trouble me. Let me walk through them chronologically. At 11:47 p.m., I heard someone in the corridor. Soft footsteps, furtive. They stopped near the front of the carriage. A door opened and closed. Footsteps didn't return. Around 12:17 a.m., Whitmore's pocket watch stopped, presumably when he was attacked or died.
At 12:43 a.m., Mrs. Hartley claims she discovered the body. But here's the first inconsistency. I was awake at 12:43. I heard her scream, but heard no footsteps before that. If she walked past my door, I should have heard her approach. So she's lying about when she discovered the body? Reeves asked. Or lying about discovering it at all? What if she already knew Whitmore was dead? What if she'd been there earlier, say at 11:47 when I heard those footsteps? You think Mrs. Hartley killed him? I think she went to his compartment that night. Whether she killed him or found him already dead, that's the question. Margaret continued. Second inconsistency, one shoe half unlaced, one perfectly tied. If he was preparing for bed, why unlace only one? If interrupted, why no signs of struggle? Third, the whiskey glass, half drunk, the cigarette case closed. These suggest he was relaxing, not expecting danger. Fourth, the body's position. He sat in the window seat, head back as if he'd simply leaned back and stopped, not the position of someone fighting an attacker. Finally, the blood pattern. One wound directly over the heart, precise. No hesitation marks, no defensive cuts on his hands. Either the killer was remarkably skilled, or... She paused dramatically. Or Whitmore didn't fight because he didn't perceive a threat, because there was no visible attacker to fight. Reeves stared. You're saying he was killed by invisible means? I'm saying the evidence suggests he died without knowing he was being killed. And that, Inspector, is very interesting indeed. While they'd been talking, the police locksmith had opened Whitmore's metal document case. A constable brought it to the conductor's office. Inside were carefully organized folders, each labeled with initials. Margaret recognized 4 immediately: VA, PK, CH, TB, the blackmail victims they'd identified. But there were more, many more. DC, photographs of a distinguished gentleman in compromising positions. Notes, Lord Danbury Chambers, £300 quarterly. E.g., evidence of embezzlement from a church charity. Father Elias Grant, £200 quarterly. M.W., documentation of a bigamous marriage. Martin Wheeler, £500 one time. Whitmore had been blackmailing dozens of people across Edinburgh and London, a systematic criminal enterprise. Good God, Reeves muttered, flipping through folder after folder. He must have had enemies everywhere. But only 4 of his victims are on this train. The others had no opportunity to kill him here. She examined each folder. TB, Thomas Brennan, official court-martial documents, testimonies from fellow soldiers, a damning letter from his commanding officer. While Private Brennan's retreat prevented further casualties, his actions demonstrate concerning lack of courage under fire. CH, Constance Hartley, old playbills showing Connie Nightingale in revealing costumes, plus a handwritten letter. She was the toast of Whitechapel music halls, known for bawdy songs and bawdier behavior. VA and PK, Ashford and Kingsley, accounting ledgers with discrepancies highlighted, plus a notarized statement from a former bookkeeper. I witnessed both partners systematically moving company funds to personal accounts over 18 months. Thorough, Margaret observed. He kept detailed evidence. His victims couldn't simply pay him and assume he'd destroy this. He could always demand more. Motive for murder, Reeves agreed. But Margaret had found something else, a 5th folder, labeled Personal. She opened it. Inside were documents about Whitmore himself,
a birth certificate showing he was born James Hall in Whitechapel, a death certificate for Sarah Hall, his mother, who died when he was 12, and records showing he legally changed his name to Whitmore at age 20. And most interesting, a sealed envelope marked, "To be opened only in the event of my death." "Inspector," Margaret said, "permission to open this?" Reeves nodded.
Margaret broke the seal carefully. Inside was a single sheet covered in Whitmore's neat handwriting. "If you are reading this, I am dead. I expect this outcome. One cannot extort dozens of people without making enemies. I have left detailed instructions with my solicitor. If I die under suspicious circumstances, all evidence files will be distributed to appropriate authorities and newspapers. My victims will not escape justice by killing me. However, I offer one exception. If my death appears to be suicide, my solicitor will destroy all files and notify no one. I will not allow my life's work to be characterized as a desperate act of conscience. To whoever investigates my murder, my 4 current victims will be desperate to make it look like suicide. They are Vincent Ashford, Peter Kingsley, Constance Hartley, and Thomas Brennan." Silence filled the room. "He predicted his own murder," Reeves said slowly, "and identified his most likely killers." "More than that," Margaret said, rereading carefully. "He built a trap. If his death looks like murder, all victims are exposed anyway. But if it looks like suicide, they all go free." "But he didn't kill himself. The wound angle makes that impossible." "Yes," Margaret agreed, "which means either the killer didn't know about this letter arrangement, or the killer found a way to make murder look like suicide and failed. Or," Reeves said grimly, "there's something we're still missing about how Whitmore died." Margaret stared at the letter. Something nagged at her, some detail that didn't fit. Whitmore predicted his murder, built safeguards, identified likely killers, yet he still ended up dead in a locked room. "Inspector," she said slowly, "I think we need to reconsider the entire sequence of events, not just the moment of death, but everything leading up to it, because I suspect what happened in compartment 5 wasn't what we think at all." Margaret commandeered a chalkboard from the station, normally used for train schedules, and set it up in the dining car. With Reeves' permission, she began reconstructing the murder timeline. The other passengers watched with varying degrees of anxiety and interest. "Let's establish what we know for certain," Margaret began, falling into her lecturer's voice. She wrote in neat script. 10:30 p.m., Dr. Thorne takes laudanum for cough. 10:30 to 11:15 p.m., pacing heard in compartment 5, Whitmore. 11:15 p.m., pacing stops. 11:47 a.m., footsteps in corridor moving toward front of carriage. 12:17 a.m., Whitmore's pocket watch stops. 12:43 a.m., Mrs. Hartley claims just discovered body. "Now," Margaret continued, "let's add what we learned from interviews. 10:30 p.m., Thomas Brennan claims he took sleeping draught. All night, Ashford and Kingsley claim they were together in compartment 3. All night, Gerald and Lily Ashton together in compartment 8. All night, Dr. Thorne, Lord Harrington, Miss Fletcher, Mr. Moss, Mrs. Price claim they slept. Everyone has an alibi except Mrs. Hartley, Constable Williams noted. Exactly, which makes her the obvious suspect, except she had no way to enter a locked compartment, kill Whitmore, and exit while locking the door behind her. She turned to Mrs. Hartley, who sat pale and trembling. "Mrs. Hartley, I need complete honesty now. What time did you actually go to Whitmore's compartment?" Mrs. Hartley's hands twisted in her lap. I don't know what you mean." "The footsteps I heard at 11:47, that was you, wasn't it? You went to compartment 5 to deliver your blackmail payment or plead for more time. Tears spilled down Mrs. Hartley's cheeks. Yes, she whispered. Yes, I went to his compartment, but he was already dead. The dining car erupted. Reeves called for silence. Tell us exactly what happened, Margaret said gently.
Mrs. Hartley drew a shuddering breath. I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about the payment, my niece's wedding. What would happen if Whitmore revealed my past? Around 11:45, I decided to go to his compartment and beg him to accept installment payments. I only had 150 of the £200. I went to compartment 5 and knocked softly. No answer. I tried the handle. It was unlocked. I opened the door and saw... She closed her eyes. He was sitting there, head back, blood on his shirt. So much blood. I knew immediately he was dead. What did you do? I panicked, closed the door and ran back to my compartment. I couldn't think straight. If I reported finding him, I'd be the obvious suspect. Everyone would ask why I was at his compartment in the middle of the night. My secrets would come out anyway. So you waited nearly an hour trying to decide what to do. Finally, you couldn't bear it, so you went back and discovered the body again, this time with a plausible excuse about asking the conductor for warm milk. Yes, Mrs. Hartley sobbed. I'm sorry, but I didn't kill him. He was already dead when I arrived. Was the door locked when you tried it at 11:47? No, it opened easily. Margaret turned to the chalkboard and revised. 11:47 p.m. Mrs. Hartley discovers body. Door unlocked. 11:47 to 12:43 a.m. Mrs. Hartley in her compartment, deciding what to do. 12:43 a.m. Mrs. Hartley discovers body again. Door now locked. Which means, Margaret said slowly, someone locked the door from inside between 11:47 and 12:43, an hour after Whitmore was already dead. Silence as everyone processed this. Who? Reeves demanded. Who locked the door? That, Margaret said, is the real question, and I think the answer lies in understanding not who killed Whitmore, but why someone wanted us to think he died in a locked room. Margaret stood before the assembled passengers, feeling like she was conducting an oral examination, except with life and death at stake. Ladies and gentlemen, she began, I believe James Whitmore staged his own death. The dining car exploded in shocked exclamations. Reeves gestured for silence. Explain, he commanded. Whitmore knew he'd made dangerous enemies. His letter proves he expected to be killed. But what if he decided to turn that expectation into an opportunity? She walked to the window, organizing her thoughts. Consider, a blackmailer's greatest vulnerability is their victim's desperation. Eventually, someone will decide death is preferable to continued extortion. Whitmore understood this, so he conceived a plan to fake his death in a locked room, an impossible crime that would baffle police while he slipped away in disguise during the confusion. Margaret pulled out her notebook. The clues were there from the beginning. First, his telegram warning, trust no one, they know, destroy everything. I believe Whitmore sent this to himself as part of building the narrative of a man in danger. Second, his document case contained evidence on dozens of victims, but only 4 were on this train.
Why? Because those 4 were meant to be obvious suspects, red herrings to confuse the investigation.
Third, the stopped pocket watch at 12:17, a classic stage trick. Stop the watch manually to establish a false time of death. Fourth, his meticulously neat compartment. If someone was really murdering him, there'd be signs of struggle, but everything was arranged perfectly because Whitmore arranged it himself. "Inspector," Margaret said, "when you searched Whitmore's luggage, did you find any theatrical props? A collapsible stage knife, perhaps? Capsules of animal blood?" Reeves consulted with his constables, then nodded slowly. "We found what looked like stage props in a false bottom of his trunk, a retractable stage knife, several blood capsules, and detailed notes about the timing. May I see those notes?" The notes were brought. Margaret read them aloud. 11 p.m. Apply blood capsule, arrange scene. 11:15 p.m. Lock door from inside, create locked room mystery. 11:30 p.m. Someone discovers body. 11:45 to 12 a.m. During investigation chaos, apply disguise. 12:15 a.m. Slip away as a different person during Carlisle's station stop. But his plan went catastrophically wrong at the very first step. He applied the blood capsule, yes, but he used the wrong knife. She turned to face everyone. Someone switched the knives, the retractable stage knife and a real knife, identical in appearance. Whitmore, in dim gaslight, preparing his theatrical death scene, picked up the wrong knife and stabbed himself in the heart, for real. "Who switched them?" Reeves demanded. Margaret walked slowly past each passenger, studying faces, reading expressions. It would have to be someone who knew about Whitmore's plan, someone with access to his compartment before 11:15, someone with both motive to want him dead and opportunity to sabotage his fake suicide. She stopped before Thomas Brennan. "Mr. Brennan, you claimed you took a sleeping draught at 10:30, but I saw you in the corridor at 11:30, wide awake. I didn't mention this earlier because I wasn't sure of its significance. Now I am." Brennan's expression didn't change. "I took the draught, but I have insomnia, a legacy of military service. I couldn't sleep despite the laudanum." "And where were you at 11:15? "In my compartment." "Can anyone verify that?" "No." Margaret turned to the business partners. "Mr. Ashford, Mr. Kingsley, you claim you were together all night, but I heard you arguing. At one point, around 11, one of you said, 'We ensure he doesn't reveal it.' What were you planning?" Ashford's composure cracked slightly. "We discussed confronting Whitmore, demanding he return our payment and evidence. We talked about threats, intimidation, but we never acted. We stayed in our compartment. Or so you claim." Margaret continued her circuit, stopping before the newlyweds. "Mr. and Mrs. Ashton, recently married, presumably in love. And yet—" She paused, studying Lily Ashton's face. "Mrs. Ashton, your maiden name was Fletcher, wasn't it?" Lily's face went white. "Yes. Why does that matter?" Margaret turned to Sarah Fletcher, the quiet governess. "Miss Fletcher, any relation?" Sarah Fletcher stood slowly, her grey dress fading into background, but her eyes sharp and focused. "Lily is my younger sister," she said quietly. "We're from Edinburgh. We both knew James Whitmore." The dining car went very still. "How well did you know him?" Margaret asked. Sarah's voice was steady but cold. "He boarded in the same house as us 2 years ago. He discovered our father had embezzled money from his employer, a crime that would send father to prison and ruin our family. Whitmore blackmailed us for 2 years. Every penny we earned went to him. My father couldn't bear the shame. He died last year of a heart attack brought on by stress. I became a governess to earn blackmail money, and Lily, she looked at her sister with infinite sadness, Lily married a wealthy man she barely knew because we needed money to pay Whitmore. Gerald Ashton stared at his wife, shocked. Lily, is this true?
Lily was crying silently. I'm sorry, Gerald. I should have told you, but I was desperate. Whitmore said this was the final payment, £200, and he'd destroy all evidence and leave us alone forever. Your family had money. I thought if I married you, I could end the nightmare. You married me for money? Gerald's voice was hollow. I grew to love you, Lily said desperately. These past 3 days, our honeymoon, I've been so happy. I thought once the payment was made, we could have a real life together. Margaret's mind raced, pieces falling into place. Miss Fletcher, when did you discover Whitmore was on this train? When I boarded. I saw him on the platform. I couldn't believe it. What were the chances? But then I realized it wasn't chance. Whitmore probably chose this train because Lily was traveling on it for her honeymoon. He wanted to collect his final payment in person. And what did you do when you saw him? Sarah met her eyes. I knew this was our last chance. If we paid him, the blackmail would never end. Men like Whitmore always come for more. But if he died... She paused. If he died, we'd be free. Did you kill him? No, Sarah said firmly. I didn't have to, because I discovered his plan.
Explain, Inspector Reeves commanded, standing now, hand near his handcuffs. Sarah Fletcher's voice remained steady, the voice of someone who'd accepted consequences. At approximately 10:40, I went to speak with Whitmore. I was going to beg him one final time to leave my family alone, to take what money we had and disappear. His compartment door was slightly ajar. He hadn't locked it yet. I could see him through the crack. He wasn't aware I was there, and I watched him prepare his theatrical death. She described what she'd seen. Whitmore laying out a stage knife, blood capsules, checking his pocket watch repeatedly, muttering to himself, rehearsing timing. I understood immediately what he was planning. He intended to fake his death, escape with everyone's blackmail money, and start fresh somewhere else. All his victims would be exposed during the murder investigation anyway, and he'd be long gone with their money. I was furious. After everything he'd put us through, my father's death, my sister's forced marriage, years of terror, he was going to escape and leave us to face consequences anyway. So I made a decision. What decision? Margaret asked, though she already knew. I went to the dining car. It was empty. Everyone had returned to their compartments. I found a carving knife from the kitchen, similar in size and weight to the stage knife I'd seen. I returned to compartment 5. His door was still ajar. I could hear him in the washroom area. I slipped inside, found the stage knife on his table, and switched it for the real knife. Then I left. The whole thing took less than 2 minutes. He never knew I was there.
The dining car was absolutely silent, except for wind outside and Mrs. Price quietly crying. You murdered him, Reeves said. Did I? Sarah's voice was calm. I never touched him. I never threatened him. I simply let him execute his own plan, except with real tools instead of theatrical props. He stabbed himself, his hand on the knife, his choice to go through with his fake death. You caused his death, Margaret said quietly. You knew what would happen when he used that knife. Yes, I knew, and I don't regret it. She looked around at the other passengers, at Constance Hartley, the business partners, Thomas Brennan, all Whitmore's victims. He destroyed lives for profit. He drove my father to an early grave. He forced my sister into a loveless marriage. He made dozens of people live in constant fear, and he was planning to escape without consequences. I gave him a choice, Sarah continued. He could have decided not to go through with his fake death. He could have changed his mind at any moment, but he didn't. He chose to stab himself, thinking it was theatrical. I simply ensured it wasn't. That's still murder, Reeves said, but his voice lacked conviction. Is it? Sarah asked. He intended to stab himself. I didn't make him do it. I just made sure the outcome matched the action. Margaret found herself understanding Sarah's logic while recognizing its fundamental flaw. You trapped him, she said. You engineered a situation where his own planned actions would kill him. That's still causing death. Perhaps, Sarah agreed, but I sleep better knowing the world has one less predator.
Inspector Reeves arrested Sarah Fletcher on charges of murder by means of criminal negligence and deliberate sabotage. As constables placed her in handcuffs, she remained calm, almost serene. Her sister Lily collapsed in Gerald's arms, sobbing. Gerald looked torn between fury at the deception and pity for his wife's circumstances. But Margaret was troubled by something that still didn't fit. "Inspector," she said quietly, drawing him aside, "there's still a piece missing." "What do you mean?" Miss Fletcher confessed. "She confessed to switching the knives, but who locked the door?" Reeves frowned. "What?" "Mrs. Hartley found him dead at 11:47, after Miss Fletcher switched the knives, but before Whitmore executed his plan. He would have locked it himself when he started his death scene, but Mrs. Hartley says it was unlocked. Then, by 12:43, when Mrs. Hartley discovered the body officially, the door was locked. Who locked it in that hour?" Margaret turned to Mrs. Hartley. "You said you found him dead at 11:47, panicked, and ran. Did you lock his door when you left?" "No, I just closed it and ran." "Then who?" Margaret's mind worked through possibilities. Someone had entered compartment 5 after Mrs. Hartley left at 11:47, but before the official discovery at 12:43. Someone who locked the door from inside, creating the locked room mystery. Then she remembered 2 sets of footsteps. What if there had been 2 people moving in the corridor at 11:47? "Miss Fletcher," Margaret said suddenly, "after you switched the knives at 10:40, did you return to his compartment at any point?" "No, I went to my compartment and stayed there." "Did you tell anyone what you'd done?" Sarah hesitated, then looked at her sister. "I told Lily. About an hour later, around midnight, I went to compartment 8 and told her everything. I wanted her to know she was free, that Whitmore wouldn't be able to collect his money or harm us." Margaret turned to Lily Ashton. "What did you do when your sister told you?" Lily's voice was barely a whisper. "I couldn't believe it at first. Sarah said Whitmore was going to die by his own hand, that she'd arranged it. She told me not to worry, that everything would be fine." "But you did worry," Margaret prompted gently, "because you realized there'd be an investigation, and during that investigation, all Whitmore's blackmail victims might be exposed anyway. His document case would be found, your father's embezzlement would become public, and you'd married Gerald under false pretenses." "Yes," Lily whispered. "I was terrified." "So you decided to do something. You left your compartment. Your husband was asleep. He'd drunk champagne at dinner. You went to compartment 5 to, what? See if Whitmore was really dead. Lily nodded, tears streaming. I had to see for myself. I got there around 12:20. The door was unlocked. I went inside and... She covered her face, sobbing. He was there, sitting in the seat, covered in blood, dead. I saw the stage props on the table, the fake blood capsules, the notes about his plan. I realized what he'd been trying to do. And you decided to complete his locked room mystery, Margaret said. You locked the door from inside, making it seem impossible. Why? Because I thought if it seemed impossible, maybe the police would rule it suicide or accident, anything except murder that would lead to full investigation and exposure of all his victims. How did you lock the door from inside and then leave? Lily pulled a handkerchief from her sleeve, but it wasn't a handkerchief, it was a thin strip of strong paper. I'd read about this in a detective story. You can lock a door from inside, then slip paper through the crack and manipulate the lock from outside. It took 3 tries, but I managed it. She'd left the door locked, returned to her compartment, crawled back into bed with her sleeping husband, who never knew she'd been gone. So, Inspector Reeves said heavily, we have murder by sabotage by Miss Fletcher, and obstruction of justice by Mrs. Ashton through tampering with the crime scene. And, Margaret added, we have the original crime, years of blackmail by James Whitmore, which drove a man to his grave and ruined multiple lives.
3 weeks later, London. Margaret attended the trial of Sarah Fletcher, compelled by obligation to see through what she'd started. The prosecution argued Sarah had deliberately caused Whitmore's death by switching knives, knowing he would use them to fake his suicide. This constituted murder by sabotage and entrapment. The defense argued Whitmore chose to stab himself. No one forced his hand. Sarah merely ensured his planned actions had real consequences. At worst, criminal negligence, not murder. The jury deliberated 2 days. Verdict, guilty, but not of murder. Instead, manslaughter by criminal negligence and conspiracy to cause death. Sentence, 8 years in prison with possibility of parole after 4. Lily Ashton received a suspended sentence for obstruction of justice, given her youth and circumstances. Her marriage to Gerald survived, barely. He stood by her, though trust was something they were rebuilding. The other blackmail victims, Constance Hartley, Vincent Ashford, Peter Kingsley, Thomas Brennan, had their secrets exposed during trial anyway. Mrs. Hartley's niece postponed her wedding. The business partners faced embezzlement charges. Brennan's military record became public. Justice, Margaret reflected, was more complicated than she'd imagined. Whitmore was a criminal who destroyed lives, but also a murder victim. Sarah killed him, but only by allowing him to execute his own plan. The other victims suffered unjustly, but in investigating, more suffering was inflicted. No clean answers, no perfectly satisfactory conclusions.
6 months after the Midnight Express murder, Margaret sat in her small room at her Edinburgh boarding house. She'd changed since that February night. Something had awakened, a hunger for puzzles more complex than Latin syntax, for truth more urgent than historical accuracy. She still taught. The boys at Ashford Academy still struggled with conjugations, but now, in evenings and weekends, Margaret took on other work. The Pemberton case had been solved, poison in the soup, the butler guilty despite how unlikely that seemed.
Then came the missing heiress in Bath, found alive but held against her will. After that, the locked study murder in York, the disappearing bride in Cornwall, the theft in Liverpool. Each case revealed new depths of human nature: greed, desperation, love twisted into violence, justice sought through injustice. Margaret kept notes on them all in her precise teacher's hand. Perhaps someday they'd be published. Perhaps people would read about these cases and learn. But for now, she worked quietly, solving puzzles, speaking for the dead, finding truth in the complicated mess of human behavior. The Midnight Express murder had been her first case, the one that changed everything. She'd boarded that train as a simple schoolteacher. She'd disembarked as something more, a detective. Not professionally trained, not officially recognized, but capable nonetheless. Margaret finished her tea, picked up Lady Ashworth's letter about a threatening note received before her husband's fatal riding accident, and began planning her next investigation. The truth was out there, hiding in plain sight, waiting for someone observant enough to see it. And Margaret had spent 15 years teaching herself to see what others missed. She smiled slightly and began writing her response. "Dear Lady Ashworth, I would be pleased to assist with your inquiry. I shall arrive Thursday next by the morning train." The next case was beginning. The end.